In this episode, I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Irvin Yalom. Victor is a psychologist, and his work is primarily as the founder, VP, head of content, resident cartoonist of psychotherapy.net. For those of you who aren't aware, psychotherapy.net is an amazing resource that has over 300 teaching videos with live demonstrations and reflections and commentary of some of the most prominent and important psychotherapists of our time. This would also include his father, Irvin Yalom. Think Netflix, but for psychotherapists. At the beginning of our conversation, you'll hear me thank Victor because I realized his company made available videotaped sessions of Virginia Satir's work, who would later become a very important inspiration for me, both as a therapist and just as a human being. Our meeting and connection to doing this podcast came about quite randomly. I had emailed his company trying to locate a video I had purchased and couldn't find, and thankfully he responded because it was an obscure video that he would have been the only person at psychotherapy.net to know how to find. Just in our email correspondence, I noticed an openness and a warmth with him, so I thought I'd try my luck and invite him to have a conversation with me on the podcast, thinking maybe he would be likely too busy and politely decline. But as you'll see in this conversation, Victor is a very down-to-earth, generous, and compassionate person who's very open to having new experiences and sharing his knowledge. Rather than setting a specific agenda for the podcast, Victor offered to have a very open-ended conversation with me to explore and to learn together, which was very exciting for me. Since this podcast is about connection, self-connection, it was fitting for us to be able to explore topics relevant to psychotherapy as both content, which served as the context for learning together and with each other. I experienced Victor as a very earnest and supportive conversational partner. There were some very touching moments, particularly when he reflects on the gift he received from his mentor, James Bugental. Upon hearing the podcast during editing, I found myself really appreciating our mutual energy of gratitude, this gratitude we have for our respective mentors and the amazing people that have taught us, who we learned from both in person and through books and through videos. Victor, in this conversation, really helps to model some of the concepts that we discuss, and we go into some of the experiences together, sharing vulnerabilities about himself. So I hope you enjoy this interview and this conversation with Irvin Yalom. Yeah, I think the feedback you gave to me, because I said, here, I asked you what are some things you might want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, like, I've talked about X, Y, and Z, but I'm also happy to just have a conversation with you and to see where we go.
Yeah.
So that really resonated with me. The podcast is called the Self-Connection Podcast. So we can get into that because I think that encapsulates a lot of what I'm interested in, what I'm passionate about. Yeah, I'm very, very appreciative of you taking the time to meet with me.
I'm looking forward to speaking with you. We don't know each other at all, so
yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And I was remarking to my wife this morning, and I said, I'm feeling really nervous about talking to Irvin Yalom, and I don't know why exactly. And I was trying to rack my brain to try to understand, but having read and been familiar with your dad's work, I thought it might be a good idea to bring that into the here and now and just mention that to you, without an expectation of that just fading away or you doing something miraculous to me. But yeah.
Well, there's immediately when you say that, so many things come to me. One, I appreciate you just being open and transparent about that. And secondly, your second comment is, I don't expect you to do anything to make that, go away. And I think that's a common kind of idea. Like, I mean, I'm not, you're just interviewing me.
Yeah.
I'm not your therapist, but kind of immediately, since we're talking about therapy, I like to use whatever we can as kind of teaching.
Hmm.
That's certainly a common expectation that a client might have, is you're going to make it go away, or you're going to do something about it, rather
Hmm.
than, what can I learn about this
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
myself? So I would, since you've been kind of brave and to just start out our discussion with that, I would invite you, if you're willing, just to take a minute and just tune in with yourself.
Mm.
What are you aware of as you think about being nervous about talking with me?
Yeah. Well, I think I tried to express it to you in some of our email correspondence. I do have a debt of gratitude to you for what you've created with psychotherapy.net. Uh, so it was kind of, as I reflected on it, as we started to correspond a little bit through email, I realized that my use of your work and the production and everything that you put out there didn't begin just a few years ago or 5 years ago. It began 2007. So I had discovered Virginia Satir's work, who's one of the first people to do family therapy, I think as early as 1951. And I was researching anything I could at the local, like my university library, to learn more about her work. And psychotherapy.net's production of a series, I think there was 3 DVDs that I found at the library, were just so significant to be able to see this pioneer's work on video, not just reading her, because her words were impactful, but to see it really made it come to life. And so I studied her work on my own independently for 7 years before connecting to one of the institutes that does teach her work. Yeah, Victor, I just want to say thank you publicly and just in our conversation. Like, I don't know if I can express to you, because, and maybe we can get into like why Virginia Satir's work matters so much to me. It really has changed my life personally and professionally. So that as an entry point, being able to watch those videos was like, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, because it was significant. So what you did, and I think there's sort of like a kinship between us, because I see what you've done in capturing a lot of these masters. Their work is what I'm trying to do, maybe specifically with Virginia Satir. But anyway.
Yeah. A couple things. Just for the record straight, we didn't produce those videos with her. We produce lots of videos, but we also search out and find videos that others have recorded and
Right.
assemble them in one collection. So just want to don't want to give credit where credit is due. But secondly, you said you're getting a little emotional as you
Yeah.
thought about it. Can you tell me what the emotion is?
Mm. It's this like the sensation in my heart, because Virginia's work, I've been interacting and learning with her work and with many of her students for a long time.
Mhm.
And it's one of her students, her name is Maria Gamora. She just recently died. She was like 101 years old.
Uh-huh.
And she asked me, she said, because my son was just not even a year old, she said, well, you're Chinese, like what's the cultural, or what's the sort of background of how you're going to parent your son? And I said, a lot of it's going to be based on what I've learned from Virginia Satir, about family, about values, about humanistic values, and of communication and of being fully human. So a lot of those things. So when I think about, and I wonder what this is like for you to hear, when you think about these, and I know you might not have filmed the original video, but your company was responsible for producing it such that I was able to get access to it. Like these, 6 degrees of separation are these things that happen, like, and the way that you've been able to touch lives and touch my life,
Mhm.
I'm very appreciative of that. So it's a deep, deep gratitude and a connection to meaningful work for me, both work in terms of client-facing work, the therapy that I do with people, but then also in trying to produce a podcast like this, to be able to have meaningful conversations, because I'm very interested in sharing these ideas with a larger and larger audience, because a lot of people don't know who Virginia Satir was. And a lot of people don't know about people like Rollo May and James Bugental, who I've also studied and enjoyed watching their videos. Your father's very well known. I was telling my wife that I think probably most practicing therapists have read at least one book by Irvin Yalom. So maybe that's also part of the nervousness, is just that connection. But yeah, just thinking about my connection to this work and being able to branch off and to learn about other people who've been so meaningful to me. Yeah,
So,
it's a deep love. I think it's love. I think that's what it is. It's like a deep heart sensation for me. So
yeah,
yeah.
there's this conversation is kind of typical of a conversation that goes on in therapy. Like we've been talking for 5 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's so much information in there, and so many implications in there. So again, I'm not your therapist, but we're having a conversation, and there's so many ways that you and I could branch off and explore different topics. And that's something that just strikes me right now. When you're a therapist and you're hearing so many different things from a client, the words they're saying, the emotion that they're mentioning or expressing, we could go off in so many different directions. And that's one of the, I think, underlooked creative aspects of psychotherapy. It's, even if you are following a certain approach, and there's certain approaches that are being taught that are much more structured than others, but even so, you're making 1,000 choices. It's like a decision tree. I mean, I could go back and you mentioned the first thing that you were feeling nervous. And I asked you about that. And you went off to kind of give me a story about why you thought you were nervous. Now, I could have pushed you more to sit with your feelings and explore them. But you got off on some very interesting territory, and you talked about Virginia Satir, and we could go into that, and then you brought it back to gratitude, and then you're kind of embarking on your own journey to have these conversations and this podcast. So I guess that's just one thing that strikes me, is how rich that is, and how you and I we can connect on a variety of different levels, and this conversation can go off in a myriad of directions. But
I think one of the things that your reflections on, if you put on your therapist hat, you could see that there's many different branches to go, and there's many possibilities. I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about is where is the line between the discourse and the skills of therapy that should be kept within the context of therapy, and where are those skills of presencing, of listening, of being curious, like the things that you're doing with me, right? And because you're not in this formal role of being my therapist, but these things are kind of coming to mind, and I wonder, in sort of in the direction of connection, if that's a value, or if that's a wish, intimacy and connection at the level of romantic connection, of friendship, of collegial connection. I mean, I think that's a desire to connect human to human, right, in this moment with you. I think that's, for me, primary. So I wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit, just what you think of that idea of where, in terms of something like the meaningful connection. Like, it's very meaningful for me to be able to say thank you to you, right? And I think that there's something intrinsic to that, that's like, that's enough. And so I would like to hear if that, if there's an emotion or if there's a human experience for you on the other side of that.
Oh, I hope there's human experience.
Yeah,
Although with AI, who knows? You know,
yeah, yeah. You could be,
I could be a
yeah,
robot.
yeah.
Uh, uh, so what comes through my mind and in my heart? One thing I often do when I'm starting with a session with a client, I might say, you know, what's on your mind and what's in your heart, as kind of a shorthand for normally when you have a conversation, we're operating more on a intellectual level,
Right.
like, you know, how are you doing? And it's kind of a thought. Oh, I'm doing fine. You know, I just you know, and then there are facts. You know, I this happened to me, or you know, there was some change in my life, or I traveled, and I tell a story, which is fine. You know, that's basic human social intercourse. But
Mm-hmm.
when we're trying to have a deeper conversation, whether it's a therapy client session or whether it's you and I trying to have a meaningful conversation that both for our benefit to enjoy it,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully then in the process for you to have produce a podcast that other people will find benefit from, then we wanted, our intention, I think, is a little different. We want to really slow it down, tune into the other person, and then
Mm-hmm.
tune into ourself as we're talking to that other person. And it's sounds kind of simple, but it's not, because attending to you means attending both to the words I hear, attending to your facial expression, to your tone of voice, and
Mm-hmm.
attending to myself. What kind of thoughts do I have as I'm talking to you? What are the feelings I have if I slow down and attend to them?
Mm-hmm.
So then I think of other types of, I think of Carl Rogers, who had this, you know, in some sense, a brilliant insight, if you want to call it that, but just how important it is to really deeply listen to a client and attend to them, and how much you can do by simply repeating back their words, but not, you know, in a parrot-like or mechanistic way, but to really make sure you understand what the other person is saying and let them know that you're hearing them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I think of, you know, love relationships, couples, how, you know, how that's difficult to just really hear the other person without immediately getting your agenda in, whether
Yeah.
it's your argument, your prepared rebuttal for what they're saying, uh, or, you know, a parent-child, like really to hear what your parent or your child is saying. I think that's the art of being present and communicating. The difference with a therapeutic relationship is you don't have skin in the game, in the sense of you're not personally trying to get something out of that
Mm-hmm.
relationship, other than, you know, you're getting satisfaction and you're getting money. That's how you make a living. But it's easier to have that kind of embodied openness and presence than in a
Mm-hmm.
love relationship where you're trying to get your needs met at the same time as you're
Mm-hmm.
trying
Yeah.
to be there and listen to your partner.
It makes me think about the being in the role in the relationship of a father, and um, that there are certain moments where it is like the explicit, we're doing this thing, like we're you know, practicing piano or reading breakfast now, or there's some kind of task. It's kind of like it's concretized in the same way that when somebody answers the question, how are you? And they say something that's scripted, like, I'm fine, or you're not really kind of getting into it. But then there's other moments of spontaneity and of play. And I think about sort of the essence or the healing factor of play therapy, something like that, as there's this dance between sort of this concrete sort of interaction, and then also the revealing of oneself, their vulnerability. And I think my experience of you just now, Victor, is that you're sharing the experiences you've had, and I think your knowledge and awareness of a variety of different experts. I guess I'm still curious about your inner experience, and if there's anything about that you're feeling in the here and now, by way of us kind of dropping into that together. I wonder if you could reflect on that.
So just, and even as I have this conversation, I think we're always wearing multiple hats in a sense. And I'll answer your question, but so I'm trying to just be fully engaged and open as I'm talking to you. But I'm also aware that this is a podcast. This is hopefully for other therapists to listen to and learn something. And just as my father's, many of his stories are engaging stories that anyone can read, he also is wearing the hat of these are also teaching stories for therapists. So I'm kind of aware. Well, I'm also trying to say something that the viewers, the listener who's likely to be a therapist may learn something from it. So the reason, now I forgot why I made that point. Now I remember your use of the word here and now, the term. I think it's important to define, at least as I use it and I understand it, because I think it's often understood in different ways. But my father used that in terms of group therapy, here and now, specifically to mean what's happening between the members of the group in the group. So they're talking to each other about how they feel about each other. And then he used that term in terms of working with clients or patients in the therapy session, in the here and now, of how the therapist and the client felt towards each other in the therapy session. So, and I make that distinction because I think it's often used rather loosely, like here and now just means any feeling that you have now. And it's really, at least the way he uses it, I use it, it's more than just here. It's just more than just now. It's also here between the two of us. So,
and in a specific context.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
So I am feeling engaged. I'm feeling I'm consciously trying just to tune into you and to myself and to slow it down a bit. I think we exchanged a few email exchanges prior to this, and there are certain topics I've talked about on other podcasts or written about, and thought, given the topic of your podcast, the self-connection, I thought I would like to just be a little more spontaneous and see what emerged, rather than kind of make some of the same points, maybe, or same discussions I've had before. So that's what I'm aware of, and it's a pleasant feeling. I feel in touch with the energy flowing in my body, and what else? A little, not nervous, but a little vulnerability. Like I feel a little bit openness, a little stirring maybe in my heart, just to try to reveal who I am and kind of be present, get to know you. So that's what I'm aware of right now.
Yeah. I noticed when you said sharing about who I am, there's some idea of something I wanted to bring up with you. And I just smiled now because it seems like a good segue into that. Is I'd like you to share about your connection to James Bugental. I'm not sure if if anyone's asked you about this connection specifically, but I think I've seen every video on psychotherapy.net related to his work. Would you feel comfortable to share a bit about him and then your connection to him?
Absolutely. I first encountered him in graduate school, probably towards the end of my studies, and he came in to give a talk to our school, kind of a lunchtime talk. And I didn't know anything about him. He was probably in his 70s then. One grounded, distinguished looking, but kind of down to earth. And I remember he was telling some story about some old Chevy truck he had. And I was just struck by, I knew he was considered an existential, or actually he coined the term existential-humanistic psychologist. And I was aware of my dad's work, and I was aware, I'd met Rollo May and taken a seminar with him. And Rollo was a little more cerebral or erudite, and he would write about Greek gods and things. And I just struck, like, Jim is talking not about Greek gods or myths. He's talking about a Chevy truck, and it just seemed like salt of the earth. And then the other thing that struck me is at some point he was, I don't know if it was that story or another story, but he teared up. And this was in the late 80s. And men, didn't tear up much. I mean, in my lifetime, there's, I think Eagleton, it was him or some vice presidential candidate. He teared up in a speech, and he was immediately had to drop out of the race because men didn't cry in public. Right. And what struck me is he teared up, and he responded in a very kind of curious and accepting manner. He said, "Oh, I always get emotional when I tell this story." And it wasn't, "Oh, I'm sorry." So you see that with men so much, if they get emotional, "I'm sorry." Or even women or even clients, they apologize for being emotional. And it was just, so it was beautiful and refreshing, and kind of it made me curious. Like, he just said, "I'm getting emotional," and he was just accepting. He kind of paused, and then he just went on to tell his story. So
it's like it was just so, to be that in touch with himself and with his energy and with his emotions was just so natural for him.
And accepting.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
So I thought, this guy's interesting, and I signed up and took a 5-day workshop with him, which is very intense and experiential. And I think anyone who's had kind of a intensive experience, whether it's a 5-day or 3-day or 1-day workshop where they explore some topic they're passionate about, but also that's experiential, so you can really delve into your own feelings and experiences. It can be quite remarkable, and it was for me. And that began an association that lasted, 10 or 15 years of regular work with him, workshops, doing a consultation group, and eventually making a video with him. And he was a mentor and a teacher, and I just learned so much from him, and got to know his wife, and was really, I made a video of him which launched psychotherapy.net. So I have a debt of gratitude towards
That's okay.
It's existential humanistic psychotherapy in action. It's 2 sessions with a client.
Okay.
And then he did, John Carlson did a series of Psychotherapy the Experts, where he does a single session with a Black woman. That's an excellent session as well.
I wonder, as you're talking about him now, what you could be in touch with, and if there's any pearls of wisdom. I watched that session with John Carlson, and two things jump out at me. The first is about his tears. There is a moment in that session where he tears up, and he's reflecting on another client when he reflects on working with an African American client. And this gentleman said to him, I came to you, a white therapist, because I was hoping that you would make me white. And he just, in that moment, immediately gets in touch with that, and he's just reflecting, and he just gives himself that space to have that moment to get in touch with that, and then to articulate that to the audience. But it never feels like a gimmick. There's a quote by Rollo May I want to read to you later, and on this very topic that I just mentioned of gimmicks. But anyways, I'm just so curious about what if you could summarize in a few moments, like what you learned over 10 or 15 years. What stands out to you? Yeah.
Sure. And I just share, as I'd forgotten that statement that Jim's client said about hoping you could teach me to be white. And as you read that, I was just moved as well. What a statement. And
yeah, and he explained that they just wept together. That was just like, yeah, there was just something so immensely powerful in that.
And what a gift that he could weep with that client and share that story with the other client, and then you and I can still be moved by the story.
Yeah.
There are some stories he would tell over and over again, and every time he would tell the same story, he would be moved, and almost, whoever would be listening to be moved. So there are a couple of things, powerful ideas that I learned, and that's why I wanted to make a video of Jim, to preserve those ideas. And I'm in the process now of recording sessions that I'm doing, and hopefully get some other therapists who are trained by him to do so, to produce a training series of videos that really breaks down these ideas and skills and demonstrates them. So the one is, and he wrote about this for probably 50 years in one form or other, the idea of therapist presence and client presence. And this certainly relates to the idea of mindfulness, which is, very popular now. But he was writing about this. Of course, mindfulness goes back thousands of years, but he was writing about this in the context of psychotherapy for, well before mindfulness kind of became popular. And it's really how to help the client, dig inside themselves and become aware of the whole world that exists inside them, inside all of us, and how to help the client explore that. He used the term searching, and there are some specific techniques involved, but he would contrast this with, as I said, about kind of typical conversation, which he would kind of refer to like as a ping pong match. I say something, you say something, and we trade off, and we really, kind of bounce back and forth. And instead, the therapist's role is to help the client go inside themselves. And so you might, the typical launching point might be a therapist, say a therapist might say, well, what are you feeling now? And that's just the beginning. Most clients don't go too far when you ask them that. They'll say, yeah, I'm a little upset, because, I had this fight with my girlfriend and she said this, and already they're telling a story. They're repeating something that's happened to them. They're telling you thoughts they already have had, which is okay. And sometimes it's useful you have to know about the context of their life, but they're not learning anything new generally, so if you do things like saying, slow down, take a breath, what, as you've done to me today, what gets evoked inside you? as you recall that event with your girlfriend. And then there are other things you can do, just reflecting back a process that is not the content of what they're saying, but anything else, which could be their facial expression. I noticed your face looked sad as you said that, or I noticed your eyes watering up, or I noticed your jaw clenching, or the voice. You really slow down as you said that, or I notice your voice is shaking, or I notice you seem to really hold your arms tightly. So there are all these things you can do to help the client go inside themselves and dig further and discover new things. There's lots of these. It's not about techniques, but techniques are helpful and useful. So one of the most powerful things he would do, he said, is the word "and." The client says that, yeah, I feel a little, I don't know, there's a little shaky inside. And then they look to you with the expectation of the ping pong match, and you're gonna lead them on. And so he might just say, and the implication is, I get very emotional now thinking about that. I think I don't know why. I think it just connects me to my memories of working with him, and I don't.
It seems like such a respectful way to encourage the person to stay within themselves rather than maybe the therapist taking over or something like that, becoming really active.
Yeah.
Is that
it's introducing and reinforcing the idea that there is more. There's always another thing he said, which again makes me emotional. He would say, there's always more. There's an endless world inside of us for exploring. And for some clients, that's a very new idea, that there's this world inside them and you don't spend a whole therapy session exploring that, but if you get 5 good minutes and they come out with this new experience, a new understanding of themselves, that's remarkable. So back to your question.
Well, before we kind of tread along, Victor, I wonder if you could sort of model for us, by staying kind of with the emotion that was coming up with the word and then this idea of more in your relationship. I'm just so curious what was bubbling up for you in that moment. That seemed really important.
You're good. You're a fast learner. Or maybe you've obviously exposed yourself to these ideas before. Okay, so if I just tune in, I still in touch with that emotion. It's
something about the and seemed really powerful. Yeah.
I just have a faint image of him. He was so earnest. I mean, he had a sense of humor, but he was there was this sense when you sat down with him. I was never a formal client of his, but we would do role plays, or we would work with ourselves. We would do real work, therapeutic work, and exercises. And the sense of earnestness about him and caring. Just how much that's impacted the whole course of my life. As that emotion gets triggered in me, I just feel alive. I feel the energy going down my legs. I feel kind of my heart feels open. My My eyes are closed, as you can see, and I just feel, for much of my life, I was kind of depressed, and I felt I was just a little shut down. Uh, my 20s, 30s. And I think this work with him was one of the things that kind of opened me up and got me more in touch with a wide range of my emotions, that allowed me to be a better human and a better therapist. So those are some of the things I'm aware of.
Yeah, I really appreciate you going inside in that moment. And because I think it one, in this conversation, I want to get to know you. And I also want us to honor these amazing people that have touched us. And I think by us, it's like we're connecting through their work or through your experiences with them. I'm learning something about that. I want to read you a quote from him, and I want to get your reflections from this after. This is him giving his own reflections after the session with Gina, which you can find on psychotherapy.net. So
she's the African-American woman,
yes,
right?
that's right.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
that video is titled simply Existential-Humanistic Psychotherapy.
Great. Okay, so he says, but early on, I wanted to change her implicit sense of her task from telling me about herself to expressing herself. That's an important difference. Then she makes herself an object of description. When she does that, we're not dealing with a living person, information about her. I don't like to get a lot of information about a client in advance. I want to know, are they reasonably able to maintain reality tests, that sort of thing. But too much information just clouds the screen for me. I need to be as innocent in a certain way as I can be for each person to discover this unique person. And that sounds very nice and humanistic, and it is. But the real value is that way I get to know the living person, not about a person who has that name. So
yeah, I don't know what I think. I think he says it very well. I'm not sure what to add to that, but I think I guess one thing that's struck by that is he wants that for himself, and so he can be useful to her. But if I'm understanding that correctly and recall that correctly, he's saying that she has that perspective about herself, that she objectifies herself. And that, I think we all do that to some extent. And so that's one of the things he's trying to help her do, is not talk about herself. She's this way, this is her problem, but do what he can to help her experience herself in real time. And again, the way I think about it, so she can have a new experience of herself. I mean, I recall back to one of the first therapies I was in, and I was kind of a typical introspective teenager who had thought about my problems and journaled, and for years. And yet I would go to a therapy session and come out of most of the sessions with this therapist when I was in college and have a slightly new take on something. And to me, that was amazing, that I could spend 50 minutes with therapists talking about things that had plagued me for 10 years. And somehow in one session, I would have a slightly, maybe not a Hollywood breakthrough, but a slightly different understanding or experience of myself. So I think that's what he was trying to help Gina do.
Yeah, it's there's something in when you're talking about yourself and you're objectifying yourself in a way. The way that he phrased it is, he would observe her mocking herself. He'd say, oh, he'd watch her nonverbals and say, oh, there's that sly smile, or there's that kind of thing that you're doing. And he would sort of note that to her, And then, there's the entry point into being able to experience yourself in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then that gets to the second point. So of the, I mean, he's taught many things, but the two, I think, most valuable ideas. One is various ways to help the client really be present with themselves in a variety of ways, with their thoughts, with their feelings. So it's not just feelings, it's the search process that he called it, is helping them get more in touch with their thoughts, their feelings, their fantasies, their body sensations, a variety of present experiences, going deeper and staying with that and exploring that. And then invariably butting up against what he used the term, which can be a little problematic, resistance. And it's not resistance to therapy, it's resistance to life. It's coping patterns. It's ways we all are habitually that, it's impossible to live without, certain patterns of being and ways we relate to others and ourselves that are necessary for survival. There are different names for these: defense mechanisms, body armor, but ways that we go through the world that preserve us, that work for us, but also limit us. He would have various analogies he would call, like a spacesuit. You need a spacesuit to survive kind of, the atmosphere in the world, but the spacesuit restricts you greatly. So for Gina, it might have been mocking herself. For others, it might be intellectualizing. For others, maybe you lived in a family where you really had to keep your emotions hidden, because if you expressed vulnerability, you would get brutalized.
Yes.
So there are ways of being in the world, or maybe you're in a type of work, like much work that's highly intellectualized, and that's how you make a living, that's how you do your work, and expression of emotion is not going to help you.
Right. Right.
And maybe you're in a very competitive environment. Okay, well, that's all fine and good, but that may not work so well when you're entering the terrain of dealing with yourself, dealing with difficult feelings, dealing with a relationship. So say you have a highly intellectualized client, and every time you try to help them access their feelings, they go off on an intellectual tangent. So then you start, that limits them, that restricts them both in their life and in the therapy. So you start noticing that, you start putting that into words. There you are, you're talking about yourself again, or you're dealing with your difficult emotions or your depression or your relationship as if it's whatever profession they're in. You might use that as an analogy, as if it's a computer software, or as if it's you're trying to close your accounting books. So you start formulating, or tagging the resistance, and then hoping the client eventually gets some flexibility. So they still have those coping mechanisms, but maybe that's not the only way they can think about themselves, understand themselves, explore themselves. So those 2 points: helping clients search more and helping them have more flexibility with their coping patterns.
Yeah, I want to sort of make a connection here based on my experience and learning with Virginia Satir, because she provided me with a perspective that really honored whatever the coping pattern was, to help differentiate that from the person, and to be very mindful about not associating language to the identity of the person in a way that took away from their dignity or took away from their sense of self-worth. And I see that in James Bugental's orientation, his respect of people, his honoring of people, and honoring of whatever the coping patterns might be. That, I think, to what you're expressing, that it's it was built in a context for good reason. It was something that was learned, and it serves in a particular moment or a particular family situation or work situation. And you can learn things on top of that, and then you could start to have choices about these things. And I think that that way of relating to people and also relating to their patterns, it's growth oriented, and something I really enjoyed seeing. So I thank you for explaining
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had all these little phrases that he would use, like the and. Another one would be more in explaining concepts to therapists, but he may have used those in therapy. Is one was inclusion, not amputation.
Mm.
So you don't have to, you don't cut off. You don't, if someone has crutches, you don't whack them out from under them. They need those, but there are, they can grow. They can add some other ways of being or problem solving.
Was it James Bugental that talked about, he had this way of speaking, and correct me if I'm attributing it to him, and it maybe it's not him, but he would talk about the importance of support, and he'd hold his hand up and said, you want to support and provide, and I guess it would be somewhat of how we think about secure attachment in the therapeutic alliance. But then there's a hand that comes up behind it, and that's the hand that gently kind of pushes and ushers the person forward. Maybe you could explain that better than I'm able to.
Yeah, he would talk about support, but a backstop.
Backstop.
Some boundary, and let's see what he mean by that. You don't if you're confronting a client on something, say again, use the term an intellectualized client, you're if that's the way they've kind of mastered the world, is by thinking and intellectualizing, you want to support them in that, but you also want to push them to maybe explore some other ways, but there has to be the safety. So he would, another thing he would say, we would often ask him questions, well, like when if you ask some kind of general question like, well, when how do you decide how much to confront a client, or when do you do this, or would you do this in this situation? And he had this, hold up two fingers, and he would say two things. What is the alliance, and what is the context? And by that he would mean, what is the nature of your relationship? Do you have a strong relationship? Is it a first session? Is it a 10th session? Is it a 50th session? Is the client, and what is the context? Kind of and that's a broad category, but is the client suicidal? Are they in mandated treatment? Are they psychotic? Well, what is the context that you're treating them? And so all of those, and as he said, he wants to approach the session openly, but you want to have a sense about them. So, that's why we train, and whatever terms you use, whether it's ego strength or, are they actively using substances, or do they have some, what is the nature? Are you treating some client, right now that's coming out of Ukraine? What is the context of your therapy, your treatment? So these are all things you kind of have in the front or back of your mind.
So Victor, I want to change gears. I want to read another quote to you, and this is from Rollo May. This is a conversation. I don't know how well you can recall. It's like he's talking to other therapists or PhD students or something like that. This is must have been in the 70s or something, I imagine.
Yeah, this was a video produced by Kirk Schneider, and it's Kirk Schneider and a few colleagues interviewing her. And I think, the title of that video is Rollo May on existential psychotherapy.
Okay, so he reflects, and the problem is that psychotherapy has become more and more a system of gimmicks. People have special ways of doing their own therapy. They learn which particular buttons to push. They're taught various techniques by which they can, so they can at least cure this isolated symptom and that. And that wasn't the purpose at all of Freud and Jung and the rest of the really great men who began our field. Their purpose was to make the unconscious conscious. And there's a great deal of difference between them. This is what Freud was setting out to do. It's what Jung was trying to do. It's what Adler and Rank did. These people never talked about these gimmicks. It didn't interest them. What did interest them was making a new person. You see the new possibilities come up. Then you change the person. Otherwise, you change only the way he behaves, only the way he approaches this or that incidental problem. The problem is going to change in 6 months when he'll be back again for more so-called therapy. So people understand, like, psychotherapy.net is basically a library of a variety of different approaches. And what's your official role? Like the one of the founders and obviously producing, and you have probably lots of hats. I wonder if you could reflect on this quote.
I would say my take on it is, I think there's a lot, it's not my take of it. Lots of people are saying this. One thing that's happened is this list of evidence-based therapies, and so people think evidence-based therapies are somehow more effective than therapies that are not evidence-based. On the whole, that's not actually the case. On the whole, the research still shows over and over and over again that the type of therapeutic approach is not significant in explaining outcome. It's, it's the two most important factors have consistently been the therapist-client relationship, however that's referred to, and the client variable. Certain clients, if you have a very, very difficult psychotic client who's homeless or on drugs, they're going to do worse than relatively well-adjusted clients. So the fact is, these different approaches, a very small percentage of the variance of outcome is determined, if any, by the approach. But it's easier to do research on very structured approaches. So it's easier for them to get funding, to do research, and then become on these registries or lists of evidence-based approaches. They're not necessarily better at all. So that's a research question. That's a bureaucratic question. That's a funding question. But our field has moved much more into this idea of these are the approved techniques, or these are the techniques that our agency is going to allow, or that insurance is going to allow. It doesn't mean they're better. And the downside is that I think there's less emphasis on some of the things we're talking about, on how do you as a therapist develop yourself, your ability to sit with emotions, to help the client explore themselves. I recall I did a consultation group many years ago, and one of the students, he practiced, CBT type therapy for anxiety, and he said, I have clients and I do this technique or that technique, and they they get better, they improve, but then they keep coming to see me, and I don't know what to do. And during one role play, one thing that I learned from Jim is doing role plays of our clients, and then switching off, and I would do a role play with him, and client or whoever was role playing the client would have some emotions, and just trying to teach him as a therapist to actually sit with those emotions and be with those emotions, not try to do something to the client. That was an entirely new concept for him, or so it seemed. That really struck me like that. Of course, it's great to learn from different teachers and different approaches and integrate them, but the core skills of being able to actually sit with a client and sit with their emotion and be comfortable with them and help them explore their emotions. I think some of these approaches don't teach that.
Well, yeah, this kind of opens a whole other continent of exploration between us, because I started reading, based on watching that interview with Rollo May, I started reading his book Existence, and in that he reflects on the existentialists, and it gets into the use of the self that you're describing. It's enlightened, or it's informed by one's philosophical presuppositions, right? Including the ones that are technique based. So I think a reflection of what one believes about what it means to be a person, what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human being, what a relationship is, serious reflection and an experience and work with these kinds of things. And it is important. And I think the point that Rollo May makes in that interview is that it's very easy to hide behind a technique to avoid looking into the darkness, the dark abyss of things related to the limitations of what it is to be human, that we all die and that we suffer, and so forth. And these are things that I've learned about reading your father's books as well. He confronts death anxiety. His most recent book is about this topic. So, but this transition from being done to being, requires I think a recognition of the ways that we can objectify ourselves. We can objectify the client as like, there's a particular outcome that maybe I'm the therapist and trying to achieve, or and so that would have implications or effects on the idea of experience and of relationship. I wonder, I guess I'm curious about your own, where you find yourself landing these days in terms of your approach, or the balance between technique and of being and so forth. Like, what is existential humanistic a good way of describing the way that you think about or approach or experience therapy, or is there other ways that you could describe that?
Yeah, well, I just first say I have a very, very small practice. I spend most of my time producing, working with psychotherapy.net and producing new videos and kind of scouting out new talent. And I mean, there's an endless, and how can we produce videos, the kind of psychotherapy videos 1.0, as I refer to it. The first videos were just showing sessions of therapy, which was remarkable in lieu of what was there before, which was nothing. I mean, when I went to grad school, I saw one lousy video. I think it was, I didn't, I think it's just astonishing that you could go through grad school and never see anyone actually do therapy,
Yeah.
and now, but that's another topic. So I produce, I see only a handful of clients now. So just the term existential humanistic, which one that Bugental coined, differentiating it from, there's existential philosophers and people like Rollo May that call themselves existential, psychotherapists. My father always makes a point that he has never advocated for a school or a technique of existential psychotherapy. He just sees that there are some powerful ideas in literature and philosophy that are important for therapists to keep in mind. It's a lens to see the client and the therapy. And I agree with that. Personally, I've just never been drawn to philosophy. It just doesn't work for me. So what really was powerful from Bugental's work is more his overall approach, which included techniques, and of my father's work, which this idea of working in the here and now of the therapeutic relationship, therapist and client, paying attention to what happens between the two of you, like he did in group therapy, to inform and explore the patient's interpersonal world. It's not just for the fun of it or because you're humanistic and you like to sit there with the client and beat your feelings. It's because A, you think it can help them get a deeper exploration and understanding of themselves, and B, so you can apply that to helping them think and put into practice different ways that they can be and relate to other people, since so much of our world is about relationships. We're social beings. So those are ideas that are important to me. And as I moved from just being a student of therapy in life to, at the age of 62, realizing I'm not the youngest kid in the room anymore, even though kind of on a
You look great, Victor.
on an archetype, on a if you go back to, I don't know, I'm okay, you're okay, transactional analysis, the tapes we have in my mind, I still think of myself as a kid. And every time I meet someone on Zoom, I'm always a little surprised. Oh, they're younger. They're younger than me. So all of that to say, I'm kind of stepping into, being more of a teaching role and mentoring to some, and teaching through the videos I produce. Where was I going with that? I'm drawn to this idea with myself and with people I teach through, directly or indirectly. This idea of gaining greater knowledge and ease with who we are as a person, as a therapist, and becoming freer to step outside the box we kind of get in when we're professionalized. I think often the professionalization process of going through school, which is important, but it restricts us. It restricts us. It often limits us from being spontaneous, from being warm, from being loving, from revealing things to our clients that are human, and make them feel good, and give them hope, and give them support to go take risks with their life. So I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some things that come to mind.
For sure. I think maybe one of the last things that I'd like to discuss with you is just this phrase, self-connection, which to me is like the center point of my study of Virginia's work. It's really kind of propelled me to focus on this, of trying to understand what it means. I wonder if you could just free associate a little bit for yourself. When you hear the phrase self-connection, what comes up for you? And some of the things you were saying really resonated with me, but yeah, I wonder if you could indulge me a bit.
Yeah, well, this does resonate for me. I think, brings up things that have been on my mind a lot, probably for the last several years. But this idea that, we're this being, we're this entity, and when we look back upon our lives, even though, most of us have been through times of very difficult struggle. Some have gone through life with less bumps and abysses than others, but I've certainly had my share of difficult times. And we're a very different state of mind, and yet I'm exactly the same person I was that when I was 9 years old. I mean, right? And I think we all have that. It's kind of not a dilemma. It's kind of paradoxical in some way. Like, how can we be the same person and have the same essence? And yet we discover new things. I mean, I discovered maybe 20 years ago that I had, artistic interests and leanings, and started with actually drawing stick figure cartoons for psychotherapy.net that I hired artists to draw because I quote, didn't know how to draw, and then started, improving very basic. I still don't know how to draw very well, but then I started painting, and then I started getting into doing some wood carving, and then I started getting into what I'm doing right now mostly is metal sculptures. And it's fantastic, and I love it. And then I can look back on my life and think, oh, I had these little creative leanings that maybe I expressed a little bit of, or maybe I didn't express at all. And how would my life have been different if I had, somehow been able to run with those things earlier in life? How does this tie together?
So it seems like if I could just reflect a little bit, there's this paradox of like, I'm changing, but I'm the same. there's something essential about me. And I think in your experiences with art, it's like you were paring down to something. It's funny because I think about the wood sculpture. You're cutting away something so that the thing that's there could be there. And I think that's a beautiful image for self-connection. It's like a lot of what that means to me, it's not essential to define what self-connection means, but I think it's important to be able to let go of the things that are, you know, maybe patterns or identities that no longer fit. And I think that ability to let go, there's something about that letting go process of carving away that it's alive for me. And I think that's the process which is a way of pointing at what I think about when I think about self-connection. So I wonder what you think of that.
Well, what comes to mind to me is our work with clients, and that, you know, Jim's idea of supporting clients. Like, you're trying to find what their essence is and support that and nurture that. I mean, I have not, you know, I've had the fortune or misfortune, whatever it is, to generally work with what we call high functioning clients. I've certainly had some clients who are deeply, deeply traumatized, but you know, I haven't worked with sociopaths or, you know, so generally people, they have some integrated identity, and how precious it is to co-discover with your client what is their essence, what is precious about them,
Yeah.
and how to support and nurture that so that they can be more of that person in the relationships they're in, or it's getting into a new relationship that's going to fit better, or and you know, express more of themselves in their work, or find some new work that allows them, you know, that as I say it now, this is kind of a, I don't know, something I've thought about, but really you're kind of cleaning away, you know, like, yeah, I don't know, now I have that image of a surgeon. They talk about getting into some wound or cleaning up some, you know, fibers, or, you know, I don't know, you know, tendons that are frayed, you know. I kind of feel like we're trying to clean up, get rid of the noise, get, you know, and help support their essence to grow more in terms of the person that they can be. It sounds kind of Pollyannish in a way, or, you know,
Yeah.
but I believe it.
I want to share a Pollyannish story with you. I was in a 8-day training a few years ago before the pandemic, and as it was coming towards an end, I kept having this thought of like, I would like to feel special. I would like to feel special. And I just, when I hear thoughts like that, I just, oh, that's kind of like my ego, and whatever does that mean? And then I was talking to a friend, and we were on this university campus, and we were looking out at everyone. And I had this idea that I was looking at the students and the various people passing by, and I had this association. It's like all these people are passing by. They're like constellations. They're like stars. And that we all have a star quality in a way. And I think that that's that yearning, that voice that was quietly kind of bothering me, that I wanted to be special. It's like we all yearn towards that essence that I think you're describing. And so instead of thinking of a client list or a caseload, I thought about, you know, these are people I'm working with that are stars that have forgotten they're stars, and my job is to try to help remind them. So I think of it as like a star list. So yeah.
Well, that sounds like it's a beautiful image to end on.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's any final thoughts that you want to share, what this was like for you. I could say that I don't feel nervous anymore. I feel really connected with you somehow, Victor. I really enjoyed the journey. This would have been nice, like going for a nice nature walk with you and having this conversation. I could imagine us doing something like that. So I'm very appreciative of you, and thank you for sharing. I've got I've learned a lot from our conversation today, and I have experienced a lot too.
Yeah. I too, this was a new or experience for me. As I said, I kind of was set kind of an informal goal for myself, just to try to be open to this conversation and see where it would go, rather than trying to make certain teaching points. And I feel I've succeeded in that.
Yeah.
So it's been good. I've enjoyed, and I've didn't know you at all from this conversation. I feel like I now know who you are and have some connection, and would hope that we'll have a chance to talk in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. There's many things that I wanted to ask you and explore with you. And that's it. Thank you so much for taking the time. So